forget to pray, 'cause there'll be hard times. Hard times, oh yeah, yeah. Who knows better than I?
A big drop on Wall Street today.
The worldwide credit crunch.
Big losses. A virtual bloodbath and stock markets have plunged.
Just what she meant.
So what's causing the world's current financial crisis? To answer this question, let me tell you the story of Sir James Hargreaves, an English gentleman who lived not all that long ago. You see, Mr. Hargreaves, he was quite the industrious hard worker, and he came up with an idea. Instead of spinning yarn just one spindle at a time, what about making a machine that could spin 8 yarn spindles at once? His invention was called the spinning jenny, revolutionized fabric production. You could now produce 4 times as much yarn with half the number of people. Half the number of workers were now required to meet market demand. Sounds good? Well, not exactly, you see. The consequence was that the price of yarn dropped. Many lost their jobs. It was not too long before a rowdy crowd of disgruntled former yarn spindles rioted, came to Mr. Hargreaves' house and smashed his machines. They sent him fleeing for his life to London. Well, that's not exactly how the story ends. You see, what eventually happened over time was that market for fabric grew. People started to consume more. Radical, extravagant consumerist ideas such as changing your underwear weekly started. Eventually, the economy grew to match the gains that technological efficiency had created. You see, that's what technology does. It makes us more efficient at producing things. With less labor, we can produce so much more. But if we don't consume more, we'll end up with a surplus in labor and people lose their jobs. Now, the reason why this is so interesting is we see a virtual identical repeat. These are the same things that caused the Great Depression of the 1930s. The late 19th century and early 20th century, you have a huge number of new technological inventions that make us more efficient than ever before. You have the combustion engine, you have production lines, you have transatlantic flight, you have radio. And all of these new inventions make us more efficient than we have ever been before. Overall, between 1923 and 1929, the efficiency and output per laborer increased 32%. However, take-home pay only increased 8%. This means that people could only consume and purchase 8% more stuff. The consequence was that fewer workers were needed to be able to produce all the goods and services that were being consumed. The result? People lost their jobs. And this was the fundamental cause of the Great Depression of the 1930s. So what was it that eventually got the North American economy out of the Depression?
America is busy now. Factories hum and millions of men, formerly idle, now work night and day on tanks, airplanes, defense orders. But what about tomorrow? Tomorrow, when the defense emergency is over, can we keep these men employed making goods people need for living? New labor-saving machines will be invented. Must they again throw men out of work? Or can we use the new machines to make more goods, more jobs?
So what was it that eventually got us out of the Great Depression? Well, the same thing that got us out of England's little textile recession. People started to consume more. Initially, it was in the form of a wartime economy. More bombs, more boats, more ships, more tanks. But after the war, we have the birth of a new consumerist culture. We're Roosevelt implements new legislation that protects workers from the exploitation of corporations, ensures a minimum wage, ensures that people have good working standards.
But will attempt to give to the industrial workers of the country a more fair wage return to prevent cutthroat competition.
Corporations, also through the means of advertising, start encouraging increased amounts of consumerism. Basically what we happen is, as much as technology makes us more efficient, we, the new consumerist culture, consume just as much.
So hardly realizing it, they come into their purchasing stage and are off on a wild, non-stop ride.
Today, we're about 4 times as productive as the average worker in the 1950s. Today, factories in the West are virtually almost entirely automated, except for a few supervisors and people packing things. They are run almost entirely by machines. The more technology makes us efficient, the less employees we need to produce the same amount of goods and services. The problem we now have is twofold. The first problem is a virtual identical repeat of what happened during the Great Depression. Even though we can produce so much more, people can no longer afford as much as they're producing. Even though production has gone up, real wages have stagnated and in some cases substantially declined. Each time we take a factory and we move it to, say, the Honduras or somewhere where the labor force is paid, say, example, Honduras, $12 a day, we are again creating on a global scale a workforce that can't afford to buy the goods that they're manufacturing. This is important because that's what caused the Great Depression. The second part of the problem is something new that we have never had to deal with before. You see, we've been increasing consumption to match our increase in production. But what we've been consuming is the planet itself. Almost 80% of all old-growth forests are gone. 90% of the world's large fish are no longer there. According to the last UN survey, 60% of the world's ecosystems are in substantial decline. Basically, we're consuming ourselves out of a planet to match the increases in technological efficiency. So here's the challenge that faces us as a civilization. What got us out of previous depressions and recessions was we found new ways to consume more goods and services. But how do we get out the current financial situation and not increase consumption? Well, one option and one strategy that was tried back during the Great Depression was Roosevelt reduced the work week
to prevent unduly long hours for labor.
Initially, it was a 10-hour workday, and he reduced it to 8 hours a day. The idea is to share the work. If there's less work to go around, distribute it so that more people can become employed. And we see the same thing happen in the 1960s.
I'm not satisfied when the United States had last year the lowest rate of economic growth of any major industrialized society in the world.
The North American economy again is slowing down. Kennedy starts talking about reducing the work week.
This country is changing. We had a 58-hour week, a 48-hour week, a 40-hour week. As machines take more and more of the jobs of men, we're going to find the work week reduced.